Here's an extensive detail of the abuse of black male slaves by white women. According to a certain historian, few scholars have viewed the relationships of enslaved men and free white women through the lens of sexual abuse, in part because of gendered assumptions about sexual power. This is in keeping with both the standard feminist conceptualization as a tool of patriarchal oppression, as well as the traditional unfeminist notion of women as too weak, emotionally and physically, to commit serious crimes, let alone sexual abuse, and the idea that men cannot be raped. However, it is becoming increasingly clear that women, too, are capable of committing horrid sexual offenses and using sex as a means of domination and control. You are welcome to this video. Don't forget to hit the like button right in front of you, share with friends to spread our black narrative, and then subscribe to stay with the family. As light-skinned enslaved women who were the product of mixed-race couplings were particularly vulnerable to sexual predation, so were light-skinned male slaves finding themselves a great deal the particular target of such sexual exploitation. Apparently, they may have attracted their enslavers more, who in most cases were swooned by the mere sight of them and would exert racial supremacist authority over exercising them as their sex property. As Thomas Buckley found in his analysis of divorce in antebellum Virginia, roughly 9% of Virginia's divorce petitions from 1786 to 1851 were for interracial adultery, with 23 of those petitions coming from white men who complained about their wives' relationships with black men. Peter Nielsen, traveling in Virginia in the 1820s, recorded that he had learned about a planter's daughter having fallen in love with one of her father's slaves. She had actually seduced him. In her 1861 autobiography, Harriet Jacobs told the chilling story of a male slave named Luke, who was kept chained at his bedridden master's bedside so that he would be constantly available to tend to his physical needs, which included sexual favors. In veiled language so as not to offend the sensibilities of 19th century polite society, Jacobs reported that most days Luke was only allowed to wear a shirt so that he could be easily flogged if he committed an infraction, such as resisting his master's sexual advances. In a 2011 Journal of the History of Sexuality article, the scholar Thomas Foster contended that enslaved black men regularly were sexually exploited by both white men and white women, which took a variety of forms, including outright physical penetrative assault, forced reproduction, sexual coercion and manipulation, and psychic abuse. In one example provided by Foster, a man named Lewis Bourne filed for divorce in 1824 due to his wife's longtime sexual liaison and continued pursuit of a male slave named Edmund from their community. Foster contended that such pursuits could enable white women to enact radical fantasies of domination over white men, while at the same time subjecting the black enslaved male to her control. Foster also contended that such pursuits were not uncommon, as demonstrated by testimonies from the American Freedmen's Inquiry Commission, established by the Secretary of War in 1863, which took depositions from abolitionists and slaves regarding the realities of slave life. Such depositions included stories of sexual liaisons between enslaved men and their mistresses. Indeed, there is considerable documentation of white women forcing black men into having sex. Captain Richard J. Hinton, an abolitionist commander in the Civil War, stated, "I have never found a bright-looking colored man whose confidences I have won, who has not told me of instances where he has been compelled, either by his mistress or by white women of the same class, to have connection with them." One former slave told Hinton that his mistress ordered him to sleep with her after her husband died. Foster further concurs with scholars who argue that can serve as a metaphor for both enslaved women and men, as the vulnerability of all enslaved black persons to nearly every conceivable violation produced a collective subjectivity.
Welcome back to Breakdown Friday. I am Joseph Ward. As you know, I got my homies with me, Patrick Irvin, Professor Carl Tone Jones, and we are here talking about a subject that we've mentioned in the past, but we deep diving in it today. We're giving it a full breakdown. The sexual abuse of black men, but we're giving it from a historical context. But we're going to talk about it as a whole, but we want to talk about the historical context of the sexual abuse of black men in America, starting with slavery, because, you know, black men have been branded as the the perpetrator of SA against white women. And the propaganda that was created in the early it was going through the early 1900s, but it began before then. But I'm thinking about the movie Birth of a Nation, when it was really brought to life via the big screen through that movie. But the trope of the black male being the over sexualized brute who ravages women. But it turns out that black men were, and still are, often victims of SA. Hence the movie or the documentary that Tariq Nasheed put out, the butt breaking documentary. So that is one of the things that we're getting into. But we're talking about just the straight up sexual abuse of black men from white women, from white men. And we're also talking about slave breeding as well. So we want to get into it and break down all of this, because when it comes to SA against black men specifically, of course it don't happen. We want to sweep it under the rug. It's not talked about on a wide scale. Black men are not given spaces to talk about that. Men, period, are not given spaces, but especially black men. But we can do what we want to do on this channel, so that's what we're doing. But before we get into the discussion, make sure you hit that like button. Hit that like button with both your fingers. Like, comment, subscribe, share. Make sure you can get as many people as possible involved in this conversation. And remember, if you don't like this video, if you don't hit that like button, and you are not African American, Joe Biden told me to tell you, you better hit that button or you ain't black no more. So let's get into it. PC, man, you already know I'm coming to you first, man. You the historian, man. Y'all, hey, man, look. PC be bringing that history, and y'all know he do. So, Pat, you got your bowl, because he finna cook. If you don't get your bowl, you ain't gonna have no more food left, because I'm gonna eat it all. So, get the bowl.
We're about to experience some wild turkey tonight.
Hey, man, wow. It's a wild turkey soup. But let's get into it, man. Let's you seen the video. It was given a history of how black men were specifically the victims of sexual assault by white women. I want to have that conversation, but I want to have an overall conversation about the sexual abuse of black men. So what are your thoughts on the video, but also what are your thoughts on the overall abuse of black men?
Well, like everything else, man, black men have become the scapegoats for all things necessary to move a social agenda forward. And so when we examine these particular cases, and it goes back to the this goes back to early 1600 lore. Actually, prior to this became the legitimizing and the justification for the institution of slavery, is that black people, specifically black men, who were 90% of the first captives of slavery in America, Africans in America, were identified as being savages, and with an incredible sexual hunger and lust for white women, or they were a danger to white women. So, and this is largely, and you can read a lot about this in Dr. Tommy Curry's book.
Yeah.
When he talks about, I forget the damn title.
The Man Not.
The Man Not, right. You can read about this in The Man Not, when Dr. Tommy Curry speaks to the obsession with black men's genitals by white men.
And we'll talk about that too.
They've always fantasized about figuring out a way to try to conquer it. And they've always felt inept in dealing with the concept of black genitals. And so, specifically because they've always seen and observed their women lusting after that body part on black men, specifically seeing as many of the African enslaved peoples, our ancestors, were naked most of the time. So with body parts exposed. Now, we can go into how they've developed a lot of narratives to cloud the history, because even in Wilmington, North Carolina, right? In 1898, there was a big uh there's one of the first race riots or race massacres in the country's history. And not and I'm talking about in freed towns since the end of the Civil War and Reconstruction era. And what you found is these white supremacist groups were printing narratives about needing to protect their children, their women, from these black savages. And then because the majority of the white population couldn't read, they would put it in comics. So this is where you get the concept of political comics. It wasn't just used for this purpose, but it was used to pass on a message that was so clear that even somebody who was illiterate could understand it. And the propaganda began. Propaganda campaign had begun years prior to, because at this particular time in Wilmington's in North Carolina, right? In North Carolina, they had passed laws that made it legal for black men to hold positions in government. And so you had black men sitting on the state legislature. And it was the first coup d'etat in the country's history, because these black men were forcibly removed from office by this group named the Redcoats. Now, the red shirts, excuse me. And the red shirts were like the Ku Klux Klan, but they didn't worry about wearing any hoods. You knew exactly who they are, who they were, because they didn't mask up. And a lot of the furor behind the propaganda to remove these brothers was portrayed in the media previously, as they continue to write stories about black men raping white women, because there's a lot of white women who ended up with black children in that particular time. And so there was a brother, and I like I said, I wanted to look it up real quick, but I'm looking at something else on my phone. This brother actually went out and actually he had his own printing press. And in his printing press, he wrote up the story detailing the fact that it was white women who were chasing black men around. And because of this led to this is exactly the incident that sort of like stoked the fires of the Wilmington race massacre. And we need to really illustrate the power of this, right? Because we're going to get into the whole notion behind, white women and their infusion of violence sexually towards black men, and weaponizing it against themselves, weaponizing their white womanhood as victims against brothers, right? The damsel in distress that they play.
Yeah.
So one of the things that happened was, based on this, they burnt down his printing press. Now he fled to Philadelphia, and because he was, he was mixed, he was, half black, half white. He passed for white in order to elude capture here in Philadelphia. But while that was going on, they used that incident to then raid the state Senate house, the state assembly house in Wilmington. And then they went on to go to the black neighborhoods. And this is something that we need to, because too many of our women have assumed the same, tried to assume these types of controls and manipulation tactics over black men. But so we got to address that later. But because of this particular the furor that was unfurled, they then went into the old military war chest of the Confederacy and broke out Gatling guns. The Gatling guns you wind up, the first machine guns. And those guns lined up beside it on roads and streets with rifles and shotguns. And then they participated in setting the houses on fire where all the black families are in. And when the women and children were running out of the house, they were gunning them down in the streets. They
eviscerated that community. That's right. The word I'm going to use.
So the numbers between 300 and 800 people, 800 black folk were killed that day in that particular time. So that is one of the byproducts of those things. Everybody knows about Tulsa and well, not everybody, but people should know about what happened in Tulsa with the two lovers that were caught in the elevator, and then the white woman screamed that she was being sexually assaulted by the brother when they were caught kissing and the doors opened up. Right. So that led to that. But I want to get into the definition of grape real quick as I transition, right? Because I think it's very important when you speak about people not being able to, or people not alluding to the fact that men can't be great. Listen to the definition that is currently, if you look this up, if you do a Google search, this is the definition that is still in existence today. Grape is a sexual assault involving sexual penetration without the victim's consent. Now, most people, when you hear that, you realize that unless you're using some type of tool or object, a man cannot be graped by a woman. But so as we go on content, and it says penetration, this includes sexual intercourse or other forms of penetration. So, such as a project or another body part performed against someone's will, someone who is incapable of giving valid consent, or without their voluntary, genuine, and willing agreement. Now, I can tell you that when you read that definition, it totally removes any aspect, with the exception of probing or plugging, for a man to be graped by a woman. But I can tell you as a man, I have been, if you want to go by the other definition that was used, which is sex without your consent, when we all speak of euphemisms such as no meaning no, several times. And I've been told by women, listen, if I wanted to have sex with you, I'll just take it. And as long as your body part work, they can just take it.
Well,
unless you want to get violent with them,
yeah,
which could possibly lead to some other complications. And this happened to me on more than one occasion. I've been groped in the workplace, and you know, with listen, I worked in one place where it was a customary thing. You got too close to women, they would literally grab your crotch and to size you up against everybody else that's in there, or to promote their sexual innuendos with you. So when I read the definition, because I just wanted to check it out to see if it changed or if it was updated, it's still archaic in concerns to the times we live in today, and how easily it is for or how narrow the scope and scale is for those who can easily be considered the aggressor in these situations, versus somebody who, because they choose not to try to overpower someone else, can be considered the victims. It's just a crazy way of looking at it, but with that playing for now, there's much more to come. Sure.
Yeah. That definition that you read, you know, looking at the definition, because it's talking about penetration without one's consent. Well, that doesn't just mean that a person is held down and being penetrated against their will. That also means that a person is penetrating another person, and the penetrator is doing that against their will, because that happens. It happens. That's why we're here talking about the history of it. So, and we're going to come back to it, but you also alluded to the false SA claims that have happened throughout history, because, you know, black men, that has been something that as black men, you learn that it happens to a lot of black men. I mean, we can see it. It's a high profile case right now going on with Shannon Sharp with SA claims, and the way it's looking, it looked kind of shaky, you know.
Just and and we've all talked about situations I've dealt with and dealing with. And it's something to the fact that if you have a conversation, even if the conversation is led by women in the workplace, right? If you respond to something they say in the comment, in the conversation that they get offended by, but we're having a conversation, they then can take those conversations to the DEI office and have you put under investigation for workplace discrimination and sexual discrimination in the workplace, and sexual not sexual assault, but sexual harassment in the workplace.
So
based on those conversations,
right. So that leads me to this. So Pat, let's go ahead and jump up in here, right? You saw the clip. You're familiar with the history of sexual assault against Black men. You heard what PC just said. So the question I have for you is, Black men have been the face of SA in America for a while, for over 100 years. So how do we educate at least our people on the history of SA against Black men? How do we educate them about this group of men who are actually being victimized, even though this group of men are the face of SA?
How do we? You want my real answer or my keep hope alive answer?
Give me the real. The real one gonna be more entertaining anyway. So
the real answer is we can't. You can't. What you're asking for is the equivalent to, in the minds of the people that we're talking about trying to educate, is the equivalent to teaching people that it's okay for a PDF file to babysit kids. Like, it's on that level for these people.
mm-hmm.
And we're seeing that play out in several other conversations that are being had about us as a group, Black men as a group. Yes, there are some allies. We have to say that not everybody is kicking our teeth in. But for the most part, there's a lot of teeth being, slammed in the curves. So what would be nice is if we could just have a conversation about how we used to try to have this conversation a while back when we used to talk about there's nothing that Black men went through that Black women didn't go through, and there's nothing that Black women went through that Black men didn't go through, and blah, and vice versa, and vice. And we used to have that. We used to try to have that conversation. Now we can't have that conversation anymore because we're stuck in a perpetual game of Victim Olympics. And right now, the world champ don't want to give up the title. And we're not even asking for the title. But any sort of message that alludes to the fact that we went through things too, they view as an attempt or a claim at the throne. And we get smacked back. So you can't talk to a large swath of people about Black men being victimized in a sexual way. I was having this conversation not too long ago with a white woman who was trying her damnedest to little boy me in the conversation. And she was getting very frustrated because, my favorite game is
ask questions, and you're right.
Yeah, you're right. Now what? It's my favorite game. So as I'm playing the game with her, I decided to pause the game for a moment, and I just asked her, you keep saying that Black men have more rights than white women. What about the Black men that were owned by white women? And she said, well, there were no Black men owned by married white women. And I said, yes, there were. And she said white women didn't have the authority or the legal standing to own anybody if she was married. And I showed her documentation that says you're wrong. if we were alive 200-300 years ago, you could have owned me.
Right.
And your husband could have tried to assume control of me, and you could have taken your husband to court, sued him, and won the case and continued to own me.
Just talked about that in the clip.
She could not process that. Like, and it wasn't just processing it from me, it was processing it from sources of people that had the same melanin deficiencies that she does.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't stomach it. And then I've had the same conversations with black women who, revealing that to them and showing them the evidence, broke down the conversation. They later came back and said, I just had to process that because I never heard of nothing like that before. But the optics of it, the mere fact that hearing this piece of information broke the conversation for them until they were able to process it and come back, that says a lot about how far away we are from being able to really educate people the way we need to educate them.
I just don't understand, like, white people and I get it because the narrative is spent that only white men, or that's what we see. We only see white male slave owners. I get that, but if you've never come across the information, how do you argue against something that you don't know exists?
Because we're not arguing against information, we're arguing against narratives.
I get it. I'm trying to be logical. I know.
Yeah, you are. PC and I was talking about that earlier. Because PC chin checked me on that. But
I be having to do that for my job. I went to work today, so I be having to be logical at work. My bad. I ain't turning that off.
Look, it's the situation is we're still dealing with a world that refuses to accept white women as aggressors.
Right.
That refuses to accept women, period, as aggressors. Mm-hmm. Black women, they get to wear that label. Mm-hmm. They do get to wear that label. I'm gonna be clear about that. Black women are viewed as being aggressive, dominating, and violent, unless they're with a black man.
Right.
Unless they're with but white women are never, we're not Karen is more of an annoyance than an aggressor.
Well, we just had the case, the white military guy who killed, I can't think of their names right now, but he shot his black wife, and he got the lesser manslaughter charge instead of the first degree charge because he said that his wife was constantly abusive, which was the black wife. So
that's what we're dealing with. Go ahead, PC.
And it's hard to get people to acknowledge that they've bought into something that was fraudulent because they have an investment in it. So if you got sisters out here who identify, and I've heard many sisters who are supposedly black nationalists say they identify more with white women than they do with their own black men, then they have to accept the fact, the narrative that there's no way a white woman could do harm to a black man, even though we know, you can go back to Martha Washington. One of the reasons she married George Washington married her is because she had a harem of slaves that she inherited from her father. And she went to court to file against George Washington so she can maintain control of her slaves.
The cognitive dissonance of, on one hand, white women can't be aggressive and violent toward black men, but then on the other hand, you mad at the white lady for her involvement with Emmett Till.
See, Joe, you be giving, and I understand, man.
I be thinking this stuff.
You have a love for black people that, we share it, but sometimes you want to give black people the benefit of the doubt. And I'm just past that point of just believing that black folk in this particular situation are the women of our community blindly align themselves with these things to the point where there would be cognitive dissonance. I don't believe there's anything cognitive about this. In terms of,
You think it's intentional dissonance?
I think, well, I think
think
it's,
it's emotional.
well, yeah, well, it's you know, is what's the term I'm looking for?
Instinctual.
Well, not just instinctual, but this is bliss to them. What do they call it?
Ignorance is
Yeah. Well, to
blissful ignorance.
plausible deniability.
Plausible deniability.
To assume that they don't know about the history of white women, even though the number one MDKs of black women during slavery were white women. And all the black women who suffered at the hands of white women typically had their heads misshaped by iron skillet in the back of their heads because they knew that their men were sleeping with them as they were in the kitchen, either washing dishes or preparing a meal. So, but this unholy alliance creates this particular stigma. And this is what I was talking about, where now, and I told you I'm dealing with it at work, where if you have a disagreement or a fundamental disagreement with somebody, that they can put a whole case against you.
Yeah.
Like a whole Me Too case against you. And this is a black woman I'm talking about that did this.
Well, that's why I want to talk about the overall abuse. I did want to hit on the abuse of white women, but the overall idea of abuse again, or the overall abuse of black men, period, sexual abuse and just abuse, period, of black men overall by all people.
Yeah. Well, because when you consider that, and like Pat said, we can't really fix it. We're not in position to fix it. We don't have the power to fix it. And the people who need to fix it feel as though it's still beneficial for the system to operate this way, because we are in a gynocracy in the black community, and a gynocracy does not want to succeed or cede power to black male leadership. So this is one of the feathers in their cap.
So just to be clear, it's beneficial to the system for black men to continue to be victimized in the way we are, because it keeps the system where it is. It's
beneficial to all parts, all the moving cogs in the system.
Yep.
So I want to be clear about that, because see what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to eliminate all the loopholes where people are going to try to slip through the cracks and say, we don't have to be accountable because he's not talking about us. Talking about you.
Bringing cases on all of you.
Yeah, I'm just, this is a dragnet. We catching everybody. And addressing, because I know we started off talking about, and we can get back to the white women who have been able to do this successfully, which is one of the reasons why, even though I understand why brothers are, seeking greener pastures, because let's face it, the lack of respect and caring in our community for black men is in the toilet. But I also question the wisdom of, just forgetting the history of how dangerous that relationship is when you cross racial lines for black men.
I don't think I agree. I think it is dangerous to not know the history. We're talking right now about history that most people have never even learned.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I said there's nothing we can do. The most powerful person, the most powerful idea that you have, the most powerful source of an idea is the person that gives you the idea first.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever first introduces an idea to you, they have a very easy lane. You've never heard it before. There's nothing to compare it against. There's nothing to judge it against. You just accept it. Everybody that comes after that person has a task, because they have to overcome the buy-in that you had for the first idea you heard. And the first idea people get about black men is that they're monsters. Mm-hmm. And that idea is reinforced over and over and over and over again. So here we come after 20 years of daily doses and reinforcement, saying, hey, all black men ain't bad, they're gonna look at, of course, a black man would say that. That's the exact kind of lie that a liar would say before they hurt me. Why would you? So I think that's the other challenge that we face. And then there's this, for me, right? Cognitive dissonance is a good thing if it's happening in a space where it can be taken advantage of. But we have to pay attention to that. When you introduce cognitive dissonance, you're forcing somebody to make a decision between new information and old information. Every time they choose old information, the bar gets that much higher for what you have to do the next time you want to create a choice. And so that's why I think even with these conversations, we have to be careful, because if we introduce an idea and we're not ready to present enough information and enough emotional content, because let's be PC's right about that. These are emotional decisions that people are making. So if we're not ready to clear that hurdle, we shouldn't even set it up, because every time you set the hurdle up and you don't clear it, the next person has to set it up higher and higher and higher. So if we're not ready to have full-on conversations about these things that are going on in the community, and I'm saying this because we do have these conversations in the barbershops and all of these other places, this is where exposure becomes problematic, especially in schools and situations like that, where they say, well, it's my job to expose you to content. Well, if you expose them to content for the first time, and what you've exposed them to was trash, when they get to a place where they can learn the truth, they're not going to accept it. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're dealing with when we start talking about the reputation of black men. They expose trash. This is why flat earth still exists. I'm sorry.
Nah, you're right though. You're right. Narrative, the strengths of the narratives, how they spread and how they stick to people, and especially if it comes, if you get that narrative from an authority figure in your life, especially, that's gonna be the thing that stick. And then even though you're confronted with actual information like the examples you gave, it's either gonna shut you down or you're gonna reject it vehemently. You know.
Well, what Pat's referring to is the imprint. Mm-hmm. And once you've been imprinted with something,
it's hard to deviate.
It's literally tattooed to your soul.
Yeah.
And it's tattooed to your mind and to your memory. And that's the lens that you see things through.
Right.
And people will always get upset with Kevin Samuels, but Kevin Samuels would always say, I'm here because we need to improve the public image of black men. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did. And so one of the things he would always do was show up to his broadcast with a suit and tie on. Now, that was part of the stick, because it was that important. It still is that important. And that's one of the things we're fighting right now. And so, but we also have to deal with the stigmas that were attached that actually led to the destruction of the image of black men, because that's the gravitational black hole that all these conversations keep getting pulled back to. Mm-hmm. We start talking about, this is, the brothers. All the stats are in that verse of the narrative. You got it where black men and were identified as the face of domestic violence. Mm-hmm. They took one case. It was a football player and his then fiance, who later became his wife, getting into a fight in the elevator.
Ray Rice.
Yeah, I didn't want to mention his name, but yeah, Ray Rice. Then he became the face of domestic violence. Yeah. Then later on, sexual assault. You put R. Kelly and Bill Cosby on, as the picture of it. Then black men became the image of sexual assault. So it was easy to stick those negative stigmas on black men, even though the number says over 77% of the people in jail for sexual assault are white. 71% are white men. That's the FBI statistics from the FBI database. So if the numbers are overwhelmingly, in that particular area, then why is it and in the era of Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein and all these other people, why is it that black men are the ones that, when people think about it, the vitriol and the negative energy in terms of how they respond to it is on tilt?
Because of Diddy.
Diddy, but look at how quickly. It is, and I ain't even talking outside the community. I'm talking about within the black community.
Mm-hmm.
This is, and it ain't just the women on this one. It's
right.
Everybody.
What
is looking for? Like, you can't wait till a brother has a downfall. Like, I was waiting for this. You had people literally talking about waiting for Bill Cosby to fail because he had a pound cake speech that was promoting a book.
So, okay. If we have and I'm talking strictly about black people. So if we have a community who is not ready for the conversation, is not ready for the presenting of new information or the reawakening, how do we better and moving from the historical precedents to nowadays? Because we know young black boys are always victimized, and we know black men in specific situations, depending on what industry they in, could be victimized as well. So how do we keep young black boys and black men safe in the community who's not even ready to have the conversation about the assault or the victimization that actually happens to black men, the abuse that happens to black men regularly, and black men and black boys? How do we keep ourselves safe? How do we keep those young men safe?
The cold hard truth is that men have to accept that we can't. We can't keep the young boys safe. We can't even keep us safe. I can't even, like, here's another example of the disconnect. Talking to a black woman about the perceived patriarchal advantages I have, right?
Mm-hmm.
They always go to this one, which is why I'm using this as an example. She said, as a woman, I'm scared to go outside after dark to take my trash out. That's a fear you'll never understand. I looked at her and said, so as a black man, you think that I don't have fear of going outside at night? That is interesting. But that is an example of the disconnect. We're not even allowed to be afraid.
Right. Well, it's not even recognized.
Right. Like, so if you can't even see, like, and never mind all of the black men that have come up missing. Mm-hmm. Never mind the fact that most of the violent crimes that occur happen to men.
Right.
Never mind the fact that as a man, the same snake you're afraid of can bite me and kill me too.
Right.
All of the stuff you're worried about happening to you, statistically speaking, happened to me more.
Well, yeah, because
I'm not allowed to be afraid.
But that's a feelings argument on them, and I don't like that argument because you're arguing how you feel about going out versus what actually happens. Because, like you said, we're way more victimized.
But I'm not sure that's a feelings argument. Go ahead, Pat.
No, I was gonna say, but even if it is a feelings argument, a narrative argument, what it really is for me is a disconnecting argument.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't allow you to open up to my perspective. And as long as we're living in that world, black men are defenseless because the people that are supposed to be defending us from narratives, from like this is a woman's battlefield.
Yes, talking.
Right. Narratives, innuendos, propaganda, all of those other stuff. Gotcha. That's a woman's battlefield. Mm-hmm. Men are equipped, I square up with you. We can do that. But in terms of protecting my reputation, my image, all of those other things, I'm not equipped for that battle. And so before black men can square up and protect black boys, we have to have the reputational credit to be able to go out there and utilize what we utilize when we're protecting, which is violence. Right now, if we utilize the one skill set we have to defend, the physical skill set we have to defend, we're putting ourselves in danger of threatening not only our lives, but our very communities, because we don't have the reputational credit to demand the benefit of the doubt so that somebody can objectively look at the scenario and render a proper verdict. Because I'm not saying that as a man, I should be able to go around and beat people up. Regardless, there are always consequences, but the societal consequences are largely determined by the reputational credit available to your culture group. And that is the arena of the woman. So what can we do to protect our boys? Nothing. But what we can do to make sure that we can start doing things in the future, we can start being honest with our boys about the environment that they're growing up in, and being honest with the women as well, and letting them know, look, when your son comes around us, you're not going to like him. You're not like that little boy that you're grooming to love and care for, when you're holding his hand and spoiling him and turning him into a FB or a YN. When he comes around real men, you're not going to get the same boy back, and you're going to have a problem with that. And you got to be okay with that.
But then they would have to be willing to give up their dominance and control.
And that's why I said we can't do nothing. Go ahead,
because the gynocratic rule dictates that the buck stops with them in our community, and they'll weaponize anything. And this is why I juxtaposed it from the white women who utilize this. You would expect them to do that to us. We are at war with that community, so you would expect that they would do that. I mean, they do it to each other. And different, and warring factions, and not just warring factions, but in society, they do it to each other. So it's only, but it becomes more acceptable by them and their men when they do it to us. And it's been allowed, like a lot of women in our community have seen this as an opportunity to play a power game against us. And this is the problem. Like we shouldn't be in competition. But the competition is always there. You can't have a conversation with our women as a black man without the veins in the neck popping out, without them rolling up their sleeves like they're getting ready to throw down. And this whole thing about, I had a conversation with a woman a few years ago, and she said, well, my thing with you was I just wasn't going to fold. I didn't care if I was wrong. I just wasn't going to fold. And I'm like, this is the whole thing was, you can't dominate me and you can't outsmart me. So the whole thing was, I'm just going to, take this stand. This is going to be my last stand. This is where I plant my flag. I'm going to die on this hill. And we go through that too much. But the problem is that, and it's been said in the past, you keep playing, I'm going to get the white man on you. I'm going to call the cops. I'm going to rip my clothes and punch myself in the face. I've had family members who spent time in jail because the woman that they was with were angry with them about whatever, not get enough attention, or that they broke off the relationship. And the next thing you know, this brother is in jail because she accused him of putting his hands on her. So and he was in a different part of town when it happened.
And I know multiple women that have done that.
Yeah. Right. So go back to what you said earlier, though, like butt breaking was necessary. So all of the components of the system of white supremacy could continue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All of the components.
Judge Joe Brown had an interesting, he had an interesting interview when he talked about doing an internship, and he had to go to the Library of Congress to do some research. And his research was, what was the climate? It was something about the climate on the plantations in terms of slave revolts and how did they deter it. And one of the things they found is that when they realized they would call them like alpha black males, or masculine black males, they found that those young men that came under them were also willing to fight and resist and cause a lot of chaos and problems on the plantations. So they said they removed the males and put the women in charge. And that's when you get the narrative now
Yes.
of the big mammies on the plantation who were running the plantation.
Yeah.
And they said what they found is once they did that, the males would then become more submissive, more likely to be agreeable with their conditioning rather than fight back.
Yeah.
And so what you have is that particular family design in the Black community has been maintained, and then laws and policies were put in place. So you saw the rise of the Black boom towns. I don't even like to call them Black Wall Streets. The Black boom towns, when you had the Wilmingtons, the Galvestons, when you had the East St. Louis, and when you had all these different places that Atlanta that were able to project Black male leadership and Black male power, Tulsa and 53 different other settlements in Oklahoma at that particular time that we never talk about. When you had those rises, those were Black men who put those towns together with their own hands. And when those towns were destroyed, what happened? The government came in and created sanctuary for the women and children in those particular situations. And also systems were created where the criminalization of Black men who then had to run and flee from those territories and come north and go west. So that some of them went to Los Angeles, some of them went to Chicago and St. Louis, some of them came over here, in Detroit, some of them came over the East Coast, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, New York, and Philadelphia and Boston. But those areas where Black men migrated to, they weren't allowed to get jobs. So all the vagrancy laws went into play, and you had to build up in a recreation of the criminalized prison industrial complex.
What?
Right. So I'm about to land it, Joe.
Yeah. Nah, but you gave me a thought. But go ahead.
So all these things were put in place to destabilize the Black male's leadership proficiency in the Black community. Things we don't want to acknowledge because according to our women, we didn't go through anything they didn't go through. Right. But yet and still jails were put in place initially, the chain gangs. Right. I hate when I have these thoughts and I can't remember the brother's name, but I remember the sound of the man working on the chain gang, So all that stuff was put in place. Those are Black prisoners. The jails were put in place for Black men. That's how you started the prison industrial complex in America. And so you look at all the warring, because I'm tired of people pretending like this ain't a war. You look at all of the warring that's taking place on Black men. And when other communities of women saw their men being warred on, they didn't side with the oppressor or the aggressor. They sided with their men. And too many times in our community, we had to fight with our women. I'm not saying all of them, but if you have a faction big enough to choose feminism over Black nationalism, then you get to see that divide and split was an effective effort of divide and conquer. And too many of our sisters bought into that.
So I came across some information last week or so, probably a couple of weeks ago, about I can't remember the number or the percentages or whatever, but they talked about a good number of Black women who were overseers on the plantation because they figured that they learned that it worked best to keep the slaves in line, right? Mm-hmm. So that leads to what you made me think about is buck breaking was a total process, a total dehumanization of Black men, not just a physical aspect, but to break the men physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, to break the Black man as a whole. Because coming into America, because I often hear a lot of especially Black women talk about how they talk about it as if Black men have lost power in America. Like we once had power, and then we lost power to the white man, and the white man just decided to dominate us one day. And it's like they don't understand that neither Black men nor Black women came into this land with any type of power or protection. So Black men and Black women have been both dominated and victimized since we were brought here, and Black men have been available. Black men have been what's the word I want to use? They've been easily accessible. I just say that they've been easily accessible by white men and white women, right? So we're talking about the physical aspect, but even being physically abused. So because I was reading a story earlier about how a black female slave was tied down. Like, well, two white men were going to watch two slaves do it. So they held them at gunpoint, made the woman lay down, make the man get down, lay down on them, and make the man do his business. And, you know, it's sweet, ain't it? You got to go and do that thing, you know, doing things like that. So we're talking about not just the butt breaking as a, like the holistic butt breaking, we'll say that, but also the abuse from white men, women, the slave breeding, but also the abuse from black women, the abuse from other groups of people as well, because of the negative image of the black man being the fiend, being the rapist, being the tyrant, being the sex crazed drug addict, being the red rummer, being the person who's just all things bad, you know, put the black man face on it. And they had the books and the talks in the 90s and early 2000s talking about the assassination of the black male character. And so you all make great points when you talk about the character of the black male has been assassinated in this land for over 500 years. So a couple educational lessons won't change that.
No. I mean, you've got the Mandingo effect, because what you described on the plantation is clearly illustrated in Frederick Douglass's narratives. When he talks about a week on the plantation, he described the life of being an African slave on the plantation, where he describes the fact that, you know, from Monday morning, from sunrise to sunset, they were out picking cotton and working the fields. And on Fridays, on Friday nights, they were made to have those slugfests and forced to become drunk and then forced into sexual orgies for the weekends. And Sunday morning, they get all cleaned up for church and reindoctrinated. And then by Monday, they'd be back on the plantation, and this became the ritual. If you look at black people today, that's our ritual.
Yeah. I think they showed it in Django. I think they call it Mandingo fighting. You made me think about that too. They made black men fight each other for entertainment, like you know, you see UFC and stuff like that. So the total abuse of black men in America, it was horrific, to say the least. It was horrific how black men were broken down. Go ahead.
And I'll say this, I think, and I want to, like, with this, right, this conversation, the reason why it went to black women is because we're talking about the abuse, the assault of black men. But we're also, in our community, specifically, we're talking about how do you create men that are going to be resistant to this abuse and that are going to take ownership of a leadership role in the community. Because let's be clear, it's not a spot we've ever had in America. So we can't say we're reclaiming it.
Right.
We're having to take it.
Right.
That is largely predicate on those that are in power now ceding power, i.e. black women who are the backbones of our communities. And like, if y'all want to say that, and I'm not even disagreeing with it, like, I agree, black women are the backbones of our community, but there's a component of responsibility and leadership that comes with that. If you don't want to accept that, then you need to relinquish leadership. There are some things that you're going to have to humble yourself on. And this is not a conversation to humble black women, but this is a real conversation about what we're facing. Yes, we know that there are groups of black women that don't exist in that space. Joe and I was talking about this earlier today. Everybody I know has a college degree. That doesn't change the fact that 75+% of the black community doesn't have a degree. Just because everybody that you know is doing a certain thing, that doesn't make it the norm. We're talking about norms right now. We're talking about generalized norms. And in the generalized normative behavior of the black community, black women run things. So with that being said, because black women run things, because they are the leaders, they have a responsibility. The same responsibility we try to put on black men. I'm just like you. I told y'all earlier, my favorite game. All right, you're right. Now what? All right, we playing this game right now. You're right. Black women run the community. Y'all are the backbone. Y'all are the strength. Y'all are the everything in the community. All right, now what? Now you got to take the responsibility that comes with that mantle. If you don't want that responsibility, all right,
Well,
I'm not even getting into who you having a baby with. If you don't want that responsibility, send your boy to his dad. Send your boy to his grandfather. Send him to his uncle. Send him to a man and let that man raise that boy in the way that that boy needs to be brought up. And you support that man in those decisions. If you don't know any good men that you would that are going to raise that child in the way of a man, then one, we got a serious conversation we need to have with you as an individual. But two, it's your responsibility to find that man. That's a part of being a parent, finding those resources. So if you don't know that man that can model masculinity for your son, it is your responsibility to find that man that can model masculinity for your son, and it's your responsibility to nurture that relationship until your son is old enough to nurture it on his own. And then it's your responsibility to get the hell out of the way and let your son become the man that he needs to be for the community.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about we alluded to it, talking about the overseers, black women being overseers, but there's historical evidence to show that black men were, of course, overall butt broken, and then black women being placed in positions to keep things in checks, because now everything, the women and children are more vulnerable because the men are out the way, but the men have never been in the way for the women and children to not be vulnerable. Let's not forget that in America. But also, getting back to the focus, black men have always been targets of SA in America. Black men have always been targets of abuse in America. But because we are the face of SA, because we are the face of abuse against all other groups, our plight is not even thought about. It's not even talked about. It's vastly overlooked.
I got a task. We've all done this, but for anybody that hasn't, I task you to go around and ask a woman that's with a black man if he's allowed to say no to sex.
Good luck. He becomes gay. He becomes impotent. He becomes every shaming word in the English dictionary. Useless. I mean, good Lord. And then we talk about it, but we don't talk about consensual rape. And that's something that is what leads to a lot of the problems, because if you it's so bad, we don't even talk about how bad it is, because most of the guys that grow up to become sexual predators were the victims of sexual predators themselves. And then it's funny how we dismiss it when it's a young male. You know, when a male grows up to become one. And Iceberg Slim talked about how his mother's best friend used to molest him.
That's when he first lost trust in his mother.
Right. But there's also when he started he became overly sexualized. He became a pimp.
Right.
You know, we talk about R. Kelly. R. Kelly was sexually molested by not just his mother, but his older sister as well. And nobody, it's like it's dismissed. Well, yeah, that is true. But R. Kelly's the monster. Well, and I've often talked about it. We talk about the monster, but we don't talk about the many Dr. Frankensteins that make the monster.
Somebody made the monster.
And so if we're not going to address the monster, this is why more the producers of the monsters, this is why more monsters are being created every day. and you get to degrade the black man's image because you're sitting in and doing these wicked experiments on black males, like the older cousins and the babysitters who are sexually molesting the boys that they're babysitting that we don't want to talk about. I mean, there's a whole cottage industry of black males just being seen as body parts that are used to be exploited in these particular situations that we don't want to talk about. And let's get to the Shannon Sharp situation. Everybody wants to demonize Shannon Sharp for sleeping with, first of all, they're really mad that she's a white girl. But on top of that, there's a 25-year-old age gap between, a 35-year-old age gap in between them. But nobody said anything just a week prior to
Tracy Ellis Ross. When
Tracy Ellis Ross was talking about how she goes after younger men because they're gorgeous. That's nobody's responded to that part.
Not just that. No, not just that, because they're more fluid.
Gender fluid.
But she didn't say this, but she also talked about the malleability of the young black man. He's not as rigid as black. Right. She
can mold. In other words, she can manipulate him.
But
she can groom him.
But when black men say that, we're predators.
But so nobody wants to address it though.
I know.
Right? Erykah Badu was saying she needs to sleep with men in their 20s, right? She had a boyfriend that was like 21.
That's it. Right.
And she said because sexually they perform better. Right? So this is acceptable. Is even and because we're so brainwashed, the guys that are the victims of this see this as a guilty pleasure of their own.
Right.
So you'll even have men defend, man, I wish I was not realizing the spiritual and emotional damage that's taking place in these particular situations.
Man.
There was
internalized misandry.
Right.
Yeah.
And so and I know you're trying to cut it, John. I just want to say one more thing. We consistently look past all these different things, and then we complain about the outcomes of what black men become. We complain about but these are the things. These are one of the litany of obstacles that take place between a black male in his infancy and to the time he becomes allegedly responsible for his own actions. And I'm not legitimizing or justifying anything that anybody does that harms anybody. But what I'm saying is interesting and amazingly convenient that one is perfectly acceptable to the point where gossip about it, where there was a young man who said that he was 15 years old and a 35-year-old woman that he was sleeping with taught him how to bathe properly. And the conversation went to, well, who should have bathed him properly, totally avoiding the fact that this young man was being statutorily raped at that particular time. I just think it's very, very interesting how we phrase and form and shape these conversations going forward.
Yeah, I mean the culture doesn't care, and it's ingrained in the culture to sweep it under the rug when things happen to black men. Think about how many black people have not seen Antoine Fisher and didn't care to see Antoine Fisher compared to all the other narratives that was going around. But one of the last things I'll say is one of the classes that I do, there's a gentleman in the class. He's like in his 70s. He told a story about how he lost his virginity. He was 9 years old, and say the woman was in her 20s. And basically, he's saying she taught him how to have sex. And he didn't realize until we started talking about it in the class that he had been SA'd. So from 9 to 70, he didn't realize that he had been SA'd until we started talking about it. But it's something that just so ingrained and not talked about and swept under the rug so much. It's crazy. And it makes me mad when I see our women who get angry when black men get resources to handle our issues. And because I've heard a lot of black women complain about some of the resources that black men have gotten to handle our issues, but overlooking the mounds and mounds and mounds and mounds of resources they've gotten. But even though we might get those resources, those are still breadcrumbs compared to the loaves that everybody else is getting. But once again, as has been pointed out, our community isn't ready, and our community don't care to be ready. And because of that, if black men are vulnerable, then everybody else in the community is vulnerable as well. So y'all got to think on that. Because your vulnerability is tied to our vulnerability. Your protection is tied to our protection. Your power and strength is tied to our power and strength. So we got to think about that. So with that being said, make sure you like this video, comment, subscribe, and share. FatLifeStation.com. Check it out, FatLifeStation.com. Go over there. Make sure you go to thepax.org. Check out all the information that is up on the website, thepax.org. Of course, check out ontheshoulders1.com. And remember, if you don't like this video, if you don't hit that like button, and if you don't hit that super like button, you really ain't black. Hit that super like button down there. If you don't hit that, you really ain't black. And if you want to support Pat, you want to support PC, all the information is in the description. Y'all support my homies because y'all know they be bringing the fire and they brilliant out here. Appreciate y'all too, gentlemen. We appreciate all of our viewers, everybody who supports us and what we got going on, and especially the people who hit us up in the Cashaps, the Patreons, all the people who are helping us be able to, because especially helps me, because it helped me get resources and supplies from Black History School. So I greatly, greatly, greatly appreciate it. And just know we love y'all. Let me catch y'all on the other side. Peace and the ball of hat grease.